What cult is the most disturbing to you? Story 1. There are probably worse ones out there, but the only one I have firsthand knowledge of is Scientology. Their entry-level stuff doesn't sound all that insane until you realize suppressive person really means anyone who thinks Scientology is nonsense. Then they encourage you to cut those disbelievers out of your life, disconnection policy, even if they're family members. Your reward for doing all of this is the privilege of spending roughly $250,000 to reach OT3 and finding out South Park was telling the truth about Xenu. Don't get me started on the child labor and human trafficking within the Sea Org. Suffice it to say, Scientology is one hell of a rabbit hole. Story 2. Can't believe nobody here is talking about Aum Shinrikyo, literally a doomsday cult who took matters into their own hands. Aum Shinrikyo committed multiple terrorist attacks in Japan, including the 1995 Tokyo sarin gas attack. While only 13 people died in that incident, over 1,000 were injured, and had the attack gone according to their original plan, both those numbers could have been significantly higher. The scariest part to me, the goal was to trigger an international conflict involving nuclear war again, to trigger the very doomsday they preached. It's one thing to convince your followers the world is ending. It's an entirely another thing to convince them to bring it about. Story 3. The troubled teen industry. Any parent that gets pissed off at their teenage son or daughter can have them locked up without trial. They are run on child slave labor and maintain order by humiliation and coercion. Letters and phone calls are watched closely, but eventually just comply because these places are designed to break your spirit so they can extract as much money by keeping kids there as long as possible. It's a huge industry with close ties to political figures like Mitt Romney, and you rarely ever hear about it. Most people leave with a lot more trauma than they came in with. I went to a wilderness program called On Track that was shut down after they a child while restraining him, and the next school I went to got shut down. When a kid's parents found out, the school took him to the local jail, placed him in a cell where he was stripped down, and according to the Houston Chronicle, the prisoners rubbed Vaseline on his backside. Story 4. The People's Temple, by far, is the freakiest to me. Their leader was suffering dementia or strokes and became more and more irrational to the point he convinced everyone to end themselves. Story 5. Late to this party, but I have to say one that probably won't be mentioned, but should be the winner of this thread, Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. In the 1860s, their leader Hong Xiuquan declared himself Jesus' brother and led to them carving a bloody path through China in the Taiping Rebellion. They even took Nanjing and renamed it Taijing. 5 to 10% of China's population died. The Heavenly Kingdom wanted to wipe out the ruling government and all other forms of religion in the country. When they lost, the government systematically massacred the Hakkas, whose ethnic group made up much of the Heavenly Kingdom. They were ending 30,000 of them a day by the end of it. On the ground, though, there were atrocities committed that probably don't even have a frame of reference in the modern day. It's hard for a peasant uprising to beat World War I using mostly swords, spears, and bows. The two world wars got their kill counts with guns, war tech, and being extremely spread out. This is one country about the size of the US where people were just slaughtering one another by hand. Scariest cults are always ones where many people follow them and do awful things despite it appearing crazy to outsiders. Story 6. MLMs are dangerous. The only way to make money is to manipulate more vulnerable people and convince them they can make money, then place failure on them personally, saying they didn't work hard enough. Gross figures are reported as net figures, and with tiny profit margins, makes people think they are going to make thousands. Look at me. I made $8,000 last month, not saying that $7,800 was spent on stock. Some of them are even more dangerous by putting in their pitch that anyone who tries to tell you the truth about MLMs are haters who want you to fail, so cut them out of your life, even if they are family, meaning your whole life becomes the MLM. It's just a money hole that a small amount of people make money from. Story 7, Mormons. I had to scroll to the bottom and still didn't see this. Raised LDS, I can assure you it's a cult. The church is a tax-exempt hedge fund that funds all kinds of political action, including Prop 8 in California. Up to 100,000 missionaries actively recruiting new members globally. The new wave of anti-LGBTQ legislation, which makes gay relationships a capital punishment in several African countries, was lobbied by and funded largely by a nonprofit organization, Family Watch International, which was founded and is run by Sharon Slater, a Mormon, 100% groupthink. Creepy interviews with men in suits who determine how offensive your behavior and enforce obedience through manipulation and coercion. Brainwashing from birth to endorse a cosmic worldview that is misogynistic, homophobic, and transphobic, racist, and super judgmental. Nice on the outside, super culty on the inside. Story 8, Iglesia ni Cristo, or Church of Christ. It's a Philippines-based cult who believes Jesus Christ is just human and that their prophet is the designated one. And they believe only people from their religion will be saved. They are not allowed to read the Bible. Their tithes are compulsory, as well as their attendance in church. And not being able to fulfill those will have them questioned or expelled from the church, which is a much better thing. Attending other religions' weddings or gatherings aren't allowed. They don't celebrate Christmas holidays. They segregate their males and females during services. They're kind of the religious buzzkills in the country. It's pretty pathetic. They also have their leader mandate who they should vote for in the national elections. Story 9, North Korea. Fun fact, Kim Jong-un is not the president of NK. He's the leader of the party and the military. The title of president is still with his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. He's the eternal president. The entire family is supposedly supernatural. It's got everything from immaculate births, with signs from heaven, to being able to play perfect golf games, where doves fly out and herald perfection. They literally have a holy trinity at this point. There's a video of a foreign doctor who went to do cataract surgery there. Upon being able to see again, they would get down and praise the deer leader for giving their sight back that he took. Story 10, MAGA. I don't mean that in a conservative's bad kind of way. I don't necessarily agree with much of the conservative movement's logic or objectives, but I can appreciate when someone has a different worldview. MAGA, however, seems to be becoming more and more cultish. I use a VR platform called Big Screen, which allows you to basically sit in a cinema environment where a host plays something and up to 15 people can chat and watch along. Someone shared Trump's NH rally over the weekend, and it was just weird. It was Trump on stage running through one long list of grievances, both real and imagined, in a tone of voice that made each one seem like a triumph, all set to background music that can only be described as YouTube ASMR. The audience in the room seemed to just be nodding along in a trance-like state, not even cheering or sighing. It was so odd listening to someone depict a world that only seems to exist in some online culture war. It seems to have gotten so much worse since January 6th, like Trump has crossed the Rubicon and is openly lying to everyone. For MAGA supporters, the lies are a litmus test to ensure that they are holding faith. An example of this is the tweet he sent over the weekend, saying that he used to spar with Muhammad Ali. This is clearly a lie, a blatant and egregious lie, but for many it's just another article of faith. Story 11, Capitalism. The entire global South and most of the Western population suffer from the direct consequences of a system built around rewarding greed. Yet most, especially middle-class people, would rather see themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires rather than the exploited workers beneath them. And thus they end up defending the corporations and 1% who make profit from the unpaid value of the middle-class men's work, kill the environment, turn us in the West into indentured servants through rent and living costs, while turning those in the South into literal slaves, all to make profit margins go just a bit higher. But years of propaganda and deceitful dreams of making it big have made us afraid of fundamental change. Story 12. Pitbull apologists, which is synonymous with victim blamers. They blatantly disregard facts and peer-reviewed studies and will send death threats to victims. They will post pictures of their Pitbull-type dogs in posts about a mauling. Like, that is a sane behavior. I don't go on posts about car crash victims and say, here's my car. It's never crashed into anyone. They say it's all how they are raised, and then go on to state how Chihuahuas are worse. Okay, so is it the breed or how they are raised? Can't have it both ways, psychopath. Just bizarre, inappropriate, and cognitively dissociated behavior. Story 13. The Westboro Baptist Church. Not even because of their beliefs, but because of how they act on them. They claim to be a church, that is, to have all the usual trappings of a church, but when you see them out in the world, they are basically a cult of misfits, some of whom are not even Christians, and most of whom have very odd beliefs of their own, with a huge following. For example, as long as a few years ago they started a campaign to protest funerals that had military members in them. And the strangest thing is that they are pretty much on the fringe, yet somehow seem to be popular among Christians. They use every method of argumentation possible to try and make people feel bad about themselves and their lives, and to try and force them into some form of conformity. To top it all off, they have a lot of connections in high places in government. And yes, they are connected with the government. The reason they are so active is that they believe there is a war coming. Story 14. Everyone here mentioned great example. Children of God, Scientologists, Jonestown, etc. But in my real-life experience, I'm concerned about some off-Christian cults. I know one guy who's a part of one. They are relatively small and cut off from the Catholic Church due to the fact they proclaim themselves as messiahs. Well, their ministers do. Anyways, the guy I know did a full 180. He believes he sees demons and can sense just by looking at people whether they are demonic and ungodly. It's obvious he's been brainwashed and has some mental issues, but those people are preying on guilt ridden and paranoid people to fill their head with talks of demons and hell and scare them. It's genuinely disturbing to see a once normal person be obsessed with going to hell and being pure to avoid it. It's quite often, though, in Europe, you get approached by people from cults like that. Usually they question you about the Bible and are annoying, but if the right unstable person comes across them, it's just scary all in all. Story 15. Most have already said Scientology, but I do think it's worth belaboring. Every religion has its extremes, but they usually only make up a small segment of adherents. With Scientology, you really can't escape the extreme end no matter what. Once you're in, the exploitation begins and never really stops. On top of that, it's well documented that its founder was a charlatan and a huckster. He's not some ancient figure we don't know much about. There are plenty of real contemporary sources that reveal just how big a fraud he was. And yet, people still believe his BS and buy into this cult. That's the scariest part. Even though the cult leader is dead, it's still going strong and still ruining lives. Story 16. World Mission Society, Church of God. It's a cult that operates all over my country, United States, but originated in Korea. They get a lot of people into their cult by love bombing and false promises. My family and I ran into them while at a mall in North Jersey. They asked if I believed in God. Me being a Christian, I said yes. And so began several months of being contacted and communicating with one of their members, trying to coax me and my children into their church. The off putting part was they kept focusing heavily on my children. They didn't seem too interested in me, so long as my wife and children showed up. Even worse was that one of the women we spoke to kept asking my wife if she wanted more kids and that she should make more. So I started researching. The rabbit hole is deep. They began as a cult in Korea. An Sang Hong was their founder, and he is considered God the Father in their beliefs. Later, they came to recognize Zong Gilja as Mother God. It's wild, and essentially they worship these two church founders as if they are gods. Granted, that would be okay, but their practices are predatory and invasive in people's lives. They teach their adherents that God will judge them based on how good of a person they are, and that there is no need to do any good outside of their church guidance. Your life essentially becomes the church's, and they plan your days, activities, and schedules around what they want. They keep their members crazy busy and confused about theology all the time, while love bombing them constantly. The videos I've seen and podcasts I've heard about them are chilling because on the outside, they seem normal. So much so that many people disregard them. But once you're in their clutches, they exploit and mistreat you to a heavy extent. Their theology is also very harmful. You're essentially being taught that God is an old Korean lady, that by serving the church, you go to heaven. You don't necessarily have to be a decent person, so long as you do what they say. All your money and time belongs to the church also. It's crazy. Being a Christian, I understand how my religion can be off-putting and strange to some, but I never tell people anything but the truth, and I certainly never lied to get people to convert. However, these people will tell you anything. They will lie and smile while doing it, and they will justify it all as a part of their beliefs. If you meet them in the mall, just run away screaming cult. Story 17. In my experience, it's been the cult of American politics. People identifying as a political party, talking about themselves and others by their political party affiliation. It's caused so much hate and made so many easy to control. I've seen so many families destroyed over politics, when nothing changed other than self-serving Republican and Democrat attention seekers ramped up the rhetoric to get you excited about voting or hating your brothers and sisters. In the USA, we don't elect leaders. We elect employees to do a job we don't have time to do because we're busy with our own life. When you consider politicians as leaders, you have a follower mentality, and that's easy to control. Don't treat them like leaders. Treat them like the inept employees they are, and demand better, demand they find a job more suited to their skill set. They all lie, all of them. Trump lies, Biden lies, DeSantis lies, Newsom lies. The number of people who believe them is shocking, and that has created tens of millions of willing tools for the political class to use. One guy says the election was stolen, and look what happened. A riot at the Capitol, and millions thinking the president is illegitimate. One lady claims Russian collusion, and look what happened. Years of investigations they all knew were a farce, and millions thinking the president is illegitimate. Even though these are easily proven to be lies, nothing is done because the political class is playing you. Your continued belief without question is nothing short of a cult-like behavior. Story 18. I'm pretty late to this, but I'll post anyway. My father's uncle was a cult leader in Waco, Texas. The family won't talk about it, mainly because we don't have too many details about it, and because it seems a bit bizarre. He died a few years back, probably about 7 years ago now, and when he passed, he left us a good sum of money. He also has a lot of storage lockups in Mexico, some of which my family knows the whereabouts. Most are unknown. I believe my grandma was the only one to really know anything about it, but she has also died since then. So the only person in my family that would have been willing to tell me about it and maybe even help me get to the storages is gone. The only info I really have about it is the cult was in around Waco, Texas. The cult was called something like the Smith Religious Group, and his name was either Leonard or Eugene Smith. The only reason that's fuzzy is because my uncle is named after him. My uncle's legal name is Leonard, but everyone calls him Gene. Like I said, my family is weird about it, and Google didn't help. The cult was supposed to be pretty secretive. Story 19. I was born and raised in the FLDS religion. I left when I was 26, just after the church leader was arrested and convicted of child molestation. I had several moms, one dad, and many siblings. As far as experiences, I can't say it was overly terrible because I was living inside it and didn't really know what the outside world was like until I got the internet. I remember when a couple of my brothers left the religion. They were excommunicated. We were not allowed to talk to them at all, and they were not welcome into the home. The church was all about community living, giving what we had, as far as money, etc., to the church, or at least to the elder in charge of the home, in my case, my dad, and donating our time to the storehouse every weekend. The church was ever present and distributed books and tapes of church doctrine, and church music were played throughout the home pretty much constantly. I've been out of the FLDS for 6 years now and have no intentions of going back. In fact, it's been heartening to see a few family members on their way out recently, and I've made a few reconnections with people I haven't spoken to for years. I wouldn't recommend joining, by the way. Story 20. I joined a very extreme charismatic church in around 2006 when I was 18 years old. I'm female. I was very involved and would attend church around 5 times per week. The movement started in the UK, but I am from Canada. When I was 18 years old in 2008, I took a gap year after high school to go and volunteer in one of the churches in the UK. The rules were fairly strict. Women were not allowed to preach, and it was taught that men were the head of the household. Things got more intense, the elders not letting me leave prayer meetings till I encountered the Holy Spirit that is falling on the floor. I was made to sign a contract that I would work 60 hours a week for 12 months. However, before signing the contract, I reminded them that I would be leaving in June because I was starting university that fall and wanted to have the summer at home. In April, they told me that I was not allowed to leave until September, when my visa was up. The elders told me that they had a meeting without me, and God had told them that I had to stay the rest of the year. Being an 18-year-old girl, I was naive and terrified, and I told my parents. My parents threatened to go to the media as I was being held against my will in the UK. The elders from my church back in Canada basically had a lot of bad press already, so they convinced the elders in England to let me go. Since then, I have become an atheist, but not without being kicked out of the church first because I smoked pot. If I ever asked questions, they would tell me I had a deceiving spirit and try to pray it out of me. They only let me read the books that they said I could. It was awful. Story 21, sort of. As a kid, we were part of a large group of friends led by a charismatic person. Friendships and business were heavily intertwined, and people from the outside were encouraged to join or otherwise stay away. They were good people, and I remember feeling privileged to be a part of it, but God forbid you fell out of favor. Bye-bye, friends, and your job, if it was in the community. The leading lady had a huge ego surprise and wouldn't tolerate much dissent. All in all, a lot of bad feelings were generated. On the other hand, people normally had a great time, genuinely supporting each other on different levels. The cult guru is now in her late 70s, and the community has more or less dwindled. All in all, probably a positive experience, though some of my friends wouldn't say so. Story 22. I'm not sure if it's a cult or not, but I started to get some vibes and left early. When I first started college, during orientation and the like, my parents helped set me up with an on-campus Christian organization, Christians on Campus. A few weeks went by, and I actually kind of liked their style. They had a lot of home meetings with food, and the church services were just a room of people sitting in a large circle, all sharing their thoughts and praises. It was pretty cool. If it didn't start to get all culty, I wouldn't have loved it. Then I started realizing things were a little bit off. When they would talk about Jesus, they would say it super chant like they were brainwashed. Jesus, every time. Then, every meeting I went to, They focused on Jesus being the bread of life. Sure, it's a thing in Christianity, and that's the premise of the Lord's Supper. But they went over it multiple times every meeting and would constantly be like, we need to eat Jesus. He is life, and we must consume him. I stopped going.